who are you and what do you do?
My name is Celeste Bolte. I'm the head of Bowerbird UK, and previously I've been a digital strategist and comms manager within architecture.
Great, thank you. So where did your kind of interest in architecture first start?
I'm not sure I can pinpoint a moment in time or anything that really sort of, piqued my interest about architecture, but I've always been interested in the space around me and how places came to be. So I had quite a few friends at uni who studied architecture, and I was always very interested in their courses, but not interested enough to study it myself. So I studied media comms and politics in Melbourne in Australia. And I sort of started studying around the time where social media for brands really took off. And part of my, studies was working on social media campaigns, just in one of my modules. And from there, I actually looked to intern at a social media agency. So that taught me a lot about what I did and didn't like about a workplace and what I did and didn't like about comms. And I wondered how social media could be applied to practices in architecture. And from there, I guess that's kind of where my interest sort of grew from.
Yeah, great. So how is it actually coming into kind of architecture from that kind of different background? Especially comms, do you find there's like a resistance to kind of shift the way that it's been done for tens of years or decades or whatever?
I think that, so previously institutes used to have certain, clauses within their memberships about how architects could or couldn't advertise their services. And often it was that they couldn't advertise their services. So really since those, contracts and that kind of idea has changed, comms has become a lot more acceptable. I think particularly in the last sort of 10 years, marketing was just such a dirty word. It was nothing that architects could do because it wasn't part of their practice. But now architects are coming around to sharing their stories and really leaning in to the idea of employing comms, either managers or consultants or agencies, but also finding ways to do it themselves. Because really, you can replace the word marketing with storytelling, and all that architects need to do is tell those stories to a wider net of people. Those stories don't have to be about building, they can be about ideas or the people that work in their practices. And really communicating those stories to a larger audience just creates better design literacy within more audiences and opens up the pool for potential clients. In that you're always taught to justify, and justifying isn't always storytelling. Justifying is, using fancy words like spatial materiality and fenestration, whereas it's important to communicate what you've done to your peers and to your practice, but communicating outside of that is also equally important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So getting architecture out to the public is extremely important for the profession. I guess that's kind of what Bowerbird was born to do. It was founded by an architect and an architectural journalist, and they wanted to see a place where architects and the press could meet, share projects, and get published in other places that weren't just your design journals or, industry press. Getting out to global or mainstream media is really important too.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me a little bit more about how, Bowerbird started or kind of came about, and I guess what it does. Maybe help explain.
Sure. Yeah. So it was founded by Nick, who's an architect, and Ben, who's a design journalist. Nick actually became an architectural photographer, and he photographed a project in this tiny town in northern Australia, and then turned to the architect and said, "Now what? What do we do with these photos?" The architect said, "Well, I was hoping you would know." So Nick, being Nick, he went and researched basically what journalists would need to publish a project, and that really just informed a basic media kit which he sent around to friends to help them get their projects into the press. I think a little while down the track he met Ben, and they decided that there was a need for journalists to access a database or a library of fabulous projects and to get the architect's story, not just the sort of finished glossy photos, really dive into that, the ideas behind a project. And so Bowerbird was born.
No, great. What's the response been from journalists? Do you find they're typically receptive to it, or they're kind of grateful for it? Like, are they finding it really helpful to kind of manage their own kind of high speeds, outputs in a way?
Yeah, well, I think what's a sort of effective Bowerbird on the industry is that it connects journalists to the architectural community, which previously has been very hard to penetrate. I think it's because architects aren't sure if the press would even be interested in their projects, or if their stories, where they should send their press releases to. It's always been really hard for journalists outside of the design and industry press to find good architectural content. So for mainstream press, for national press, like newspapers, magazines, lifestyle magazines, even small niche blogs, like sort of focusing on maybe a certain typology of design, they find it really hard to find good content. So when we can invite them into a platform that has media-ready content with fabulous photography, a contact straight back to the architect, they can create that relationship with the designers themselves, and they can publish more fantastic design.
Yeah, great. So we've started in Australia, is that right?
Yeah.
And where has it it's grown since then, and where is it now?
Yeah, so the platform was founded about 5 or 6 years ago now, and we have about 10 of us working around the world remotely. So we have Chris and Claudia in Canada, servicing the US and North America. Victoria is in Mexico City, Lucas and Elliot in Sao Paulo and Brazil.
Okay.
We also have Esther in Budapest. I'm obviously here managing the UK side of things, and Ben and Nick are still working from Australia and Asia. So we've grown quite quickly, but we've never had investment in the platform. It's been completely bootstrapped. So we've grown very sustainably and kind of almost in a way that a practice grows. You spend sort of your first 2-3 years bringing in your sort of trusted clients or people that are already within your network. And then, only after that period and do you start to get a little bit of capital behind you, can you kind of invest in your own platform and make that better.
Yeah, great. You're not like almost kind of a typical tech startup that's just injected money in and you're kind of worrying about if you're actually making profit or not. Like when we work, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Very topical.
Very topical, yeah. It might date the episode actually. I don't know, it might not.
Maybe.
It might be fine. But no, it's really interesting. Yeah, you're also, I guess, there's a level of trust in that as well for architects as well, because they must be quite happy to see that you're not just a machine that's going to swallow them up and spit them out.
Totally.
Yeah.
I guess reluctant because this is such a new platform. A lot of architects that we meet are reluctant at first because it's not been around for a long time. PR has always been this very sort of smoke and mirrors, almost dark art that is really hard to understand, but really any practice with publishable work can jump into Bowerbird and instantly reach the journalists that they'd like to reach, but such a wider pool as well. So we find that some practices are a little reluctant, but because whoever's managing their region is the person who helps them with every query. Can you check over my text, or do these photos work for this project, or which photographer should I engage for my next project? All of the requests come back to us, which is a lot of work, but it's great because we're directly impacting the community and providing really great advice.
Yeah, that's great.
And building that relationship and that rapport with each person, journalists as well. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, and I guess so architects can create press kits or Bower kits? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Which then they can either send to journalists, or journalists can then kind of come in and select. So like what kind of journals or kind of journalists have you got that are kind of receptive to so far?
So we've got a really broad scope of publications using the platform, and the way that it works is architects upload their Bower kits or their press kits, and really we just ask them to fill in some details. So even if practices don't even know where to start with a media kit, you don't need to have that knowledge. You fill in the blanks. And once you've done that, we give the practice a list of publications that their project would be best suited to, for them to proactively start a dialogue with those journalists and send those projects to. I guess on the other hand, you get all this passive interest because we have a chronological newsfeed of projects, and journalists are jumping in there each day to look for either new projects, or we have a large number of freelancers who use the platform. And if they're writing about a specific topic, or they're looking to pitch a particular story in with a theme, they can actually search through our database, and no matter how old a project is, usually it still comes up and still gets downloaded and shared in new ways.
Yeah, no, that's interesting as well. It doesn't have to be almost like kind of hot off the press as well for it to get traction either initially or again as well. You can kind of because so many practices must have a back catalogue of really interesting work that if it didn't land at the time when it was built, they might just give up on.
Well, it's like we have this a phrase of dusty photo syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a practice will finish a project, they know they need to shoot it to have a record of their work, but they're not quite sure what to do with those images after it's been photographed. So those photos just sit in their folders on their servers and don't really make the impact that they could have. So we find that when we do chat to practices who feel that they maybe only have like 1 or 2 projects a year coming out, or when they actually have that back catalogue of work that they've really only had published once or twice, they can get, another 30 to 40 to 50 articles depending on the type of project, and maybe that sort of goes so much more. Yeah, it just goes further, and it's pushing architecture further.